Stay tuned for today's Antidote, brought to you by the Renegade Success Network. Today's Antidote features a healthy dose of thought-provoking insights and information for business owners, entrepreneurs, leaders, and nonprofit professionals. Each day since March of 2020, this program has offered that one thing to help you continue on your own unique pathway to success. And now, Renegades, we bring you Bob Graham and Tom Brush.
Hey, it all worked perfectly today, Tom.
Yeah, you were a little less animated. You were not expecting it to work, weren't you? You were holding out.
I had some trouble with, I usually have to do some social media magic as we start the program. And it was not, I'm a victim of however long it takes social media to do its thing. I've got to wait. There are 3 things I have to do, and they each require 3 button pushes. So those 9 button pushes can take that whole 39 seconds, or sometimes it takes 30 of those seconds, or sometimes it takes 42 of those seconds. And when the third set of 3 comes up, I have to calculate, will we be ready? Do I have enough time or not? Sometimes I just don't calculate well.
Oh, that's a lot to go through in the morning.
I'm
surprised you're able to do the show after that. Just saying.
You think you're the guy who runs all the technology. There's a lot going in the background.
I understand.
And when I don't do my magic, we see the results.
Interesting.
Yes. See, I'm contributing my part, but I set the expectation for myself that I'm going to make those 9 clicks, and those results are largely out of my control because it's all really dependent on how long it takes for us to go live before I can actually start clicking.
Okay. So
sometimes there's more to it. Believe me, I've done it now for almost 451 times. Well, more like 398. There have been 45, 50 days where if I'm in my car, it's really hard, or yeah.
Would a longer intro help?
For me, yes, but for the poor person out there in pod or broadcast land, not so much.
Okay.
And to those of you out in podcast and broadcast land, thank you for being here. That's a little the inner workings of what our program's all about. What we try to do each day, each weekday, very simple. Come up with one thing that you can consider a little differently, a slight shift in how you might be thinking about something, or, hey, it's possible. It might be reinforcement that, hey, that's how I see it. This is awesome. These guys are so affirming. Whichever camp you fall in, or somewhere in the middle, or maybe it's something that's just brand new to you, we welcome you. We look forward to your discovery, just like, honestly, Tom and I do not script this. We discover each day what's going on for us. And Tom said yesterday, and I had the same thing. We didn't know where the discussion would go yesterday. And that was episode, 451, I think?
Yes.
It was a great discussion that I reflected on later in the day and actually watched a second time. And as a viewer, I was like, these guys are actually halfway smart. And then I realized it was me, and I had to recalibrate. But I think that's what we try to do, is really think through business topics. I think we talk about topics that most people are thinking about, but don't have an outlet to discuss them. And if you are one of those people who's looking for a bigger outlet to discuss business topics, I'm going to do it right now, Tom. I'm going to break all the rules. Join our Ring Renegades Facebook group. It's a private group built for you, so you can have those discussions with people. We're almost 1,100 strong now. People who call themselves renegades, who are carving their own unique path to building whatever it is they want to build. And Tom, you know, and I know, we don't say this much, but they are in all fields, from service to white collar, from government to military, to stay-at-home moms who are doing Etsy or Scentsy or Arbonne or Tupperware, any of those things, to every flavor in between. And it's a great way to meet other people. So with that, Tom, I just took over. Sometimes I just like to show I can do it. With that, Tom, we start with our most important thing, celebration. And you may be new to us, and that's totally fine, or you may think this is crazy, but we've come to realize that if you celebrate what you've achieved already, the odds of achieving even greater things the next day and the day after go up exponentially. And we see this over and over and over with the people we work with. We were on a call yesterday. You weren't able to join us, Tom, and there was a person who you and I have worked with, and she said she had this goal of getting $25,000 more in sold business. And my first reaction was, that's a tough ask. And then she proceeded to explain that I got 4,000 here and 5,000 here, and this is coming through and that's coming through, and someone wants to do a package with me. And what seemed insurmountable to me, just observing this person over the last couple of years, suddenly wasn't just real. It was in reach. And I know the celebrations along the way that she has done as she's taken increasingly elaborate steps that I think the person I met 2 years ago would have never considered in a million years. Those celebrations fuel her. And to hear her tell it yesterday at this group with a couple other people in our Renegade Success Network was just so amazing, because it wasn't like, I'm really trying to get to $25,000 in commission sales before the end of the year. It was, hey, here's my goal. I've done this, and these 2 or 3 things are going to pop, or something else is going to come along. And that confidence, to me, is what we're trying to instill in people. So if you're someone struggling with confidence, all you got to do is reach out to Tom and me, and we are the kings of confidence. I'm not confident. I'm not always confident, but I know how to instill confidence in people, and Tom does too. How is that? I love to watch your facial expressions, folks. If you're watching the podcast, I can't get that right. If you are listening to the podcast, Tom, when I take over like running the show for a little bit, Tom just looks like, I have no idea where this is going. I have no idea what's happening. And part of why I do it, Tom, believe it or not, is sometimes I find new words that we can use going down the road. Some that even we use every time near the end of the show. Yeah. And some you've used for last week just because I keep saying it. We have cast both broad and pod. That's just funny. So, Tom, it's time to celebrate. What are you celebrating today?
I'm celebrating.
You got to be quiet for 8 minutes and 17 seconds.
It was almost playing one of those games. Like, okay, maybe I don't need to be here today, which is fine. It's all right. No, you did it. You did it very well. I am celebrating today. I've been sitting in this workshop for 3 days and have 2 days to go. Yesterday, they did a presentation on. Someone was talking about how to do some coaching consulting presentations virtually. And I was celebrating that pretty much most of the techniques that they have shared, I had either done or had done additional things beyond that. So
are they showing how we do the magic that you and I do?
No.
So we've got, oh, that's good to know. All right.
So it was just nice to know that a skill set that I have developed is further advanced than I think many of the people at least involved in that conversation yesterday. So that was just good to know that the more you do it, the more you practice it, the more you see other things that you could do or do differently. Again, goes back to, what we talk about as we measure things is like what went well, what didn't go as planned, and what, most importantly, what would I do differently? And I think that question has continued to drive how I can grow and expand and find new ways and new solutions to old challenges or new challenges. So that's my celebration.
I like that. I'm going to celebrate something completely personal that will make no sense to anyone but me. And that is when all the walls are broken down and you actually have honest discussions with someone. And someone that it's hard to have honest discussions with. And I was blessed enough to have that opportunity last night. And I would have never imagined what it could lead to. So,
Nice.
you know, if you want to call me and ask me what it is, I'm not going to explain it to you, but it's important to me. And sometimes these celebrations can be something totally internal.
Well, I would hope so.
Yeah.
Because that means that matters, right? I mean, you wouldn't want to celebrate if it wasn't something that was meaningful to you.
Correct.
And so I think that's great. And then the other thing we always do is, what is the nation celebrating today, Bob?
Oh, you're going to like this one, Tom. This is going to be in your top 3. Wow. It is Mickey Mouse's 93rd birthday.
Interesting.
I know you're a big Disney World Mickey Mouse fan. How many times have you been to Disney World?
A lot.
Okay. I've been to the wall of the Florida one twice and looked in, and I've been to the one in Anaheim and looked in. I've never gone inside a Disney World.
Needs to be our first retreat at a Disney resort property.
Okay. Yeah.
It would be a different perspective for you.
One good thing for me, that would keep me focused on business. You know, in New Orleans, there were things to do in the evening that you could separate from business. In Seattle, there's always coffee you could separate from business. In San Francisco, it's just breathtaking.
And you don't think that exists in Disney?
Not for me.
Well, you haven't experienced it yet.
I'm not a big Disney fan. I'm not a big I was going to say cartoons, but it's not cartoons. What are they? The comic book heroes, that whole genre. I haven't seen any of those movies. And you know, I haven't seen the Harry Potter movies and haven't read the books. And I'm still functional. Well, I guess that's
debatable. Given all those things, I'm not sure your trivia game would be up to speed. And that's okay.
I'm proud of that. I think my trivia game would be different. Maybe one show will have trivia day. That would be fun.
It's funny. I've done that a couple of times in groups, and I was thinking that might be a fun thing to do for members of our Ring of Renegade. There's a guy who's actually a Baltimore person who during the pandemic created his own online virtual trivia game, kind of like bar trivia. And it's fun. I've done it, I think, 3 or 4 times, and he does a really nice job. And you know, you get to know people a little bit differently, and that's kind of fun. So I don't know.
All right.
Something maybe to consider.
So our topic this week, Tom, has been expectations.
Correct.
And this is really a deep topic. I feel like we could talk about expectations for like 452 episodes and still have more to cover. But today we're talking about when expectations are unrealistic. And what I love about the slide that you put up at the beginning that you create is you didn't say when our expectations are unrealistic or when someone else's expectations are unrealistic, just if they're unrealistic. And I think it's both, right?
Absolutely.
And sometimes it's both at the same time. I think I can do a million things in one day, and my customers think I can do a million things in one day, and we're both wrong, or the opposite. We underperform and we set low expectations, and then the person might say, well, I really was expecting you to do this much for me today. I'm working with the company now, and the expectation about how many things they can do in a day, they have a process they have to go through. It takes 2 to 3 hours. Varies from day to day. Some days it's like, oh, well, we can do 4 per person. Some days it's we can do 6 per person. Some days it's, well, we can only do 2 per person. And if it's below 32 degrees, I got the impression in the discussion yesterday that the number might be 0. And imagine trying to help a business navigate when you're trying to project out staffing, revenue, manpower. Well, staffing and manpower, same thing, supplies and customer acquisition when that expectation number is all over the place. And that's one of the things I think the unrealistic expectation there really is that the person's not willing to commit to a number. I'd rather that person commit to 3 and here's what we can do per person a day, 3. Not, well, sometimes like, 6-piece cake. And then if there's a limiting factor in there, and I'm being very careful not to really talk about it specifically because I don't think that's fair to this person or his company. But I think we all go through this. How many customers can you coach? We've talked about that before. It's like, what's the number where we go, yeah, we're in too deep? Or how many games can you officiate? Or how many games can you schedule in a week and still do all the other things that you've made a commitment to do? And we all have that tug of war. And it's really around expectations, right?
Sure. I mean, and I think there's opportunities to try to determine how realistic things might be, because you can base it on past experience. You can base it on a better understanding. I think one of the things the reason things become unrealistic is we aren't clear on what else we have ahead of us or in front of us. And I think sometimes that is what causes us to try to do what we think is the best thing or what's real. And we don't really understand all of the factors that go into it. Someone calls up and says, hey, I need you to produce 6 more of these widgets. They're like, okay. And you can say, well, that's easy. It's just 6. Until you go and talk to your manufacturing group and they're like, yeah, we're already working on the last order of 700.
Or we can't get more of the supplies.
Can't get more
necessary.
Of the supplies.
That's a big thing right now, right?
Absolutely. And I think that's the piece that we're uncertain of. Just like if you went to a team member and said, hey, I'd like you to do this. We need you to do this, without knowing what else is on their plate and setting a timeline that is not for them realistic. It seems realistic for the person who is, asking them to do the work because that's when they need it, because someone else likely has asked for that. And so I think that's a big piece of it is we don't always incorporate all the information we know. And sometimes we don't know it all. We might not know that there's no supply. We had supply last week. That was great. Well, okay, now I go to get it. And this week they don't have any. So that's something we could not have necessarily foreseen.
You see that at every car dealership right now. There are very few cars on the lots. And I went by a place where they bring them into the port and it was practically empty.
Yes. And I think that's something that you don't have any control over.
Right.
You can do all you can. I guess you can pay more to get the ones that might be available. But if none are available, there's no opportunity for. It's interesting, where they're. It's funny. Liz and I were talking about this morning about something else. Liz, my wife.
Liz's wife, who does our great intro each day.
Yes, she does.
And she records that live. That's not recorded. She does it every day. She gets up and does that right at 8 o'clock or 8:03 and says it the same way every day. That's a sense of commitment.
You're really going to go with that?
There's someone out there who thought that was true for a little while. Then she makes Tom a 3-course breakfast, right?
Yeah, the story's getting bigger and bigger every minute. What we were talking about is that sometimes you go to one place and you can't find it. Even though the location might be bigger, might have more
to find a product.
To find a product, correct.
Okay, I'm sorry. I got confused.
And then you might go to somewhere else that would not seem to have that product because it's a smaller location or it's not a national chain that has much further reaching arms to access this stuff, and it's there. So I think that's it's one of the things. Without all the information, it's hard to necessarily determine whether you're going to be able to achieve the expectations that have been set forward.
I'm going to bring Michael's comment in. When you rely on China for all your electronics, guess who holds the cards? And it's, to me, I remember a time when we started to outsource this kind of work out of the US into other countries. And it was going to be, this is going to save us so much money and be so great. And it hasn't turned out that way. I don't think anyone did it with malice, but I think their expectations were, if we send stuff to China or Bangladesh or name another country, we can get cheaper labor. And the result is we're going to get more product for less money. And many, many, many US companies have gone that way over the last 40 years. And some have gone back to the US. And I can remember in the early 80s, Made in America was a big deal. And you paid a premium for Made in America. And that was something that brands like, I think Eddie Bauer and LL Bean and Ford trumpeted. And now we've kind of gotten to this gray area. One of the other areas of unrealistic expectations, is the week of Thanksgiving. Every year I fall into a trap. I go, it's a 5-day week. There are only 3 days to work. I really need to get 5 days work done in 3 days. And I run myself ragged, and I've been sick on Thanksgiving because I just did too much. I had a job years ago where I don't know why, but the day before Thanksgiving, I would stay at work till 9, 10 at night because I had set this. I've got to get this finite number of things done, and I'm going to get done. And the reality was it couldn't have been done because I promised I'll get that done by Thanksgiving. I'm like, okay, that's great. And then it all bottled up, and I had 3 days. And we're also hitting that part of the year where you're not going to be, at least I'm not going to be as efficient as I am other parts of the year because there's holiday parties, there's the Thanksgiving celebration. It already started for me this week. I had to take someone who visited to the airport in the middle of the day, and that chewed up some time on that day. And I had booked things around that all day, and I cut an hour out to do the airport run, and sure enough, it took almost 2 hours.
Yeah.
And that's the other part of unrealistic expectations. I gave no padding, or I get to see my share of doctors in a year. And I finally learned about 5-7 years ago that if I have a doctor's appointment at 9 a.m., I need to just book out my calendar for the rest of the day. There are no other appointments that day. And if I get done at 10, I'll call people, hey, how you doing? I thought this was going to go all day. And because I would be in the hospital at 9:05 when the doctor wasn't ready for me, having to reschedule 10 o'clock appointment, 11 o'clock appointment, 12 o'clock. And it was stressful. And I think that's, to me, where unrealistic expectations really kill us, because we create unnecessary stress. And when I look at my day and say, yesterday, my mother's with me, and she was rightfully so a little concerned about her son because I didn't eat lunch. I was upstairs and she was downstairs, and she said, I didn't see you come down and eat lunch. Did I fall asleep? I'm like, no, I just had meetings and calls and return calls. And she said, you need to carve out time for lunch. That's the kind of expectation that your mother gives you. And that's, to her, realistic expectation. You work really hard. She said at the end of the day yesterday, it was like 6:15, I think. And she said, you've worked really hard. I was going to make dinner. And she's like, let's go out. I'll take you out. You've worked enough today. She had an expectation for her son, who's at the beach, to work till, 3 or 4. And, no one's looking. I'm on my own. And she heard me talking all day long. Like at dinner, she was like, I don't know how you talk as much as you do all day. Little does she know. There are people out there right now, including Tom, going, oh, if only that were his problem. But that's where, and sometimes the people around us help us to manage our expectations. When your spouse or significant other or a colleague says to you, the colleague at the meeting where you're like, yeah, I can get that done Friday. And they tap you on the leg and write you the note. No way. And you're like, wait, I forgot I've got these 3 other things. And sometimes we need that, because I think we as humans are really bad at being accurate in setting expectations for ourselves and other people. It's one of those skills that if you can be really good at it, companies will love you because they can count on your promises. Nothing ever goes wrong. And if you do okay, you know what? This is going to take me a week. I'm going to tell them 4 weeks. That doesn't work either.
Yes. And I think the challenge with all of that is we can't control everything.
Right.
you can believe that you're going to get this done in this time, and then something happens, something that is completely out of your control that you sometimes have to deal with, and then that puts puts these beliefs that you have, or this past experience of, yeah, I've been able to do that in this amount of time, put you up against that, and then you're not able to do it. And I think that's part of the challenge of ever saying, okay, this is when I can get it done. Because again, I think a lot of times we don't take a look at the big picture to see all the things that could happen, that might happen, and that we already know is happening before we make those decisions about what's going to be next. And I think doctors do that all the time. How often do you walk into a doctor's office and you get in when your time is? Typically you're sitting and waiting. And I think
I have one doctor who's consistently on time. I
Oh.
have 4 or 5 doctors that I go to regularly, and they are usually 15 minutes to 3 hours late. But in one case, I know the doctor, and one time I had an issue, and he spent an hour and 40 minutes with me. And so there's a trade-off, right?
Absolutely.
And I think that's true in leadership as well. Sometimes the time you take to mentor an employee, because there's the teachable moment, and you drop everything and say, I'm going to invest 2.5 hours to help them understand this whole process, because I know in the long run, that knowledge is going to make them really good at making decisions and doing their job going forward. But that probably wasn't on your calendar for that day. You were like, well, I've got this report and that report and these things and those things, and I got return calls. But you realize, and I think that's one of the things that I see leaders struggle with, is I really want to help my employees grow in the job. They need to grow in the job, but I don't have the time to help them. And
Sure.
that's when you get employees who get bored and go, you know what, I'm going to leave and go do something else. And it's not effective in that way. And I think that's unrealistic expectations for the person who's in that leadership role. The unrealistic expectation is you think the employee wants to do the same thing forever. But I can tell you, the employees I've talked to at all kinds of companies, I love when my boss shows me something new. I love when they explain to me why they make these decisions, or I love when they let me figure things out. I see some more comments from Michael. Let me bring them in. Michael says, too many times to that never happens when it should. And that's critical in building a good team and partnership relationship with employees. Yes, I think he means the mentoring and taking that time to do the training and coaching. And it's funny because you said it yesterday. We kind of get that annual review situation where, well, it's once a year. Let me do all my coaching. So on January 3rd, you made a really egregious mistake. And I saw that same mistake occurred for the next 11 months and 27 days. And because of that, we can't give you a raise. And I had that happen to me once. I'm like, and you didn't think that it would be helpful to explain that to me in January?
Right.
Well, I was too busy. I said, and now I'm not getting as much of a raise because you saw the problem in early January. And the person even showed me their notepad where they had written the date. I'm like, how many meetings have we had? How many times have I come in and asked, how am I doing? But it wasn't your annual review.
Right.
And I think that's a challenge. And younger employees, we see research, millennials and the Generation Z really want mentoring. That is one of the more important aspects of the job. They don't want to be told what to do. They want to understand how something works, and they want to grow in that job every day.
Yeah, I would agree.
So what's your one thing, Tom?
So my one thing, I've been trying to hold off on this because as we started the show, I sort of had an idea of what it was. And then I didn't want to be like, oh, I'm just going to throw it in throughout the whole show. So I think it's kind of two things. But I think they go together. One is, in Unrealistic is real. And that's what we talk about all the time, is what's real. And I think one of the reasons things become unrealistic is because we aren't considering what is real. We don't use all the knowledge, experience, and perspective we have to better understand the situation. Consider all the things that could happen when we then set expectations or provide information that creates expectations from others. And so I think really taking the time to be clear on what is real for you in the moment, what is on your schedule, what are the other things you have to do, what are the outside influences that could come in and interrupt your best laid plans. The second part of it is, I think, communication, because I think that is the piece of it that is missing, is that we don't always share all the information so that the person who is either setting expectations or they're the person who's providing the information so expectations can be set, have all the information that's needed. So often it's we need this by Friday. Okay. Can you share more about why Friday is the date that you need it? Because it falls into this and this and this and this and this. And so then that allows the person who's maybe has the task to achieve to understand the bigger picture of where this falls into that and why it's so important to have it done on Friday, which allows them to prioritize their other things differently. And I think so often there's that piece that's missing. Just like your story about the review, is that, well, if you had shared this with me in January, there's a pretty good chance that I probably would have adjusted and not had that issue reoccur for 11 months. And I think so often that is one of the challenges, is that communication piece, so that we know and understand and then can choose or not choose. If you had that information, doesn't necessarily mean that you were going to completely change it to the way they expected. Yet there was an opportunity that if you didn't, they could continue to provide feedback over those 11 months so that they could at least see some progress towards where you want to go, and be like, hey, you know what? Maybe he hasn't gotten there yet and he's making progress.
And that review would have been a whole lot easier to do at the end of the year.
Yeah, because the review would be an ongoing conversation about how does that supervisor, what are their expectations? If they're not sharing them with you, it's hard for you to be like, well, geez, I didn't know that was what was expected, or that what I was
exactly
doing.
How I felt. I'm like, this is new information, really.
Correct. So I think that's a big piece of it, is how do we better communicate all the information that can be helpful? I think so often it's like, well, need to know. And I think that there are times, I remember a situation, I was supervising someone who felt like they needed all the information, some of which I knew I couldn't share, some of which I knew was kind of, in some ways, not really that critical to the task. Although, in thinking back on it now, that maybe that was what was real for them, is when they had the bigger, broader picture, it was easier for them to understand how everything fit into place. So I think, our perception of what is needed information and not is different. And I think if we listen and then make decisions, or at least share why that information you either can't share, or at least share why you believe that's not critical to what's going on, doesn't mean that the person doesn't think it is. So again, that goes back to what's real. So I would say that's my 1+1 thing.
Okay. I'm going to make mine super simple. My biggest challenge is setting realistic expectations, and where I fall into the trap is I'm overly optimistic. My expectations are wrapped around best case scenario. And so often best case scenario goes horribly wrong. Not because of anything done intentionally, just, the internet goes out for 2 hours. You get sick one day. I had that happen to me a couple weeks ago. I got sick all of a sudden. It's like, man, I got things to do. And I had to call people and say, look, this came up. And they're like, okay, that's fine. When will you have it done? And I think that open dialogue, like you said, is really helpful. And if people trust you, I think that's the other thing. You have to build that track record of being accurate. Then people will give you grace when you aren't accurate, because they'll be like, well, geez, Bob's done this 9 out of 10 times, this one time. And it's not his fault the supply chain's messed up. That's just the way it works. And if you can explain that to him too. So not just the communication, like you said, but being honest about what's going on and helping them understand the broader situation.
Sure. I mean, that I think that's a big piece of it is, you want to be overly optimistic and provide them the best case scenario. And yet, as you shared, how often does that usually happen? And I think by trying to create the best case scenario, we set ourselves up for unrealistic expectations when things that we cannot control come into play. And so I think that there's, one way to think about it is there a range that you could share is, all things going well, it could be this date. And I know that in the past, or I know that I've got this other thing laying out here that could impact it. So, my thinking though is this date. And that at least sets them up with a better understanding of what's going on. And if you keep in constant communication with them to say, hey, these are the things that are happening. And as I feared or thought, this happened, which means that I'm going to be closer to that other side of the delivery date. And I think that, like you said, we all want it to be best case, of course, because that makes everybody feel good and things get done quicker and whatever. And yet it would be interesting to go back and figure out how many times best case works out.
0.
It's kind of like, your expectation that you talked about this the other day about being perfect. And yet, as we discussed and figured out, you've had 0.
Those two are very closely tied.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Because it's
No
a
doubt.
lot about, we want to show how well we do what we do, and we want to please others. And giving them the best case scenario makes them feel like, oh, wow, this is awesome.
You pretty much defined my day. Those two things.
So
With a real good focus on the second one.
And so the next step is, how do you learn from that? Ask, what could I do differently? And I think those are one of those things that we should constantly ask ourselves so that we are not setting ourselves up to be overwhelmed, frustrated, because we aren't able to deliver on what we felt was the best case scenario. Because oftentimes things happen that are beyond our control, which cause that best case scenario to not necessarily occur.
Tom, would you allow me to bring the ship into port?
You started it.
All right, let me bring it home. Let me see what I can do. Folks, if this discussion has resonated with you, please give us your comments. If you're on the podcast, feel free to email them or go to that Facebook group I talked about earlier, Ring of Renegades on Facebook. Search for Ring of Renegades. Go in there. You'll be asked a question or two, like, why are you a renegade? Put a great answer, whatever it is. It's not like an SAT test where you have to write a long essay. You can put one sentence and you're going to be okay. I promise. You'll get in the group. You'll see other great people who are having these types of discussions and sharing realistically about their business and sometimes even their personal life. We have some people that the two very closely intersect, which I find very inspiring to hear that, someone talks about their children and the trip with their children and how it dovetails with work. If you're listening to the podcast, almost said it. Hey, thank you for listening. Please, please, please share it with someone who could use this. Or, I guess it's an either or. You or both. Share it by giving us a 5-star review. I don't know if you know this, but on Apple Play, on Spotify, on Google Play, not Apple Play, Apple iTunes, any of those podcast platforms, the more 5-star ratings something gets, the higher up in the rankings it goes. And that means more people get exposed to this. And and I know, let's be honest, there are plenty of other people like us out there who need this kind of information. It's easy. It'll take you less than 3 seconds to find the rate this button. Do it. You would be doing us the huge service. And we don't charge for this whole thing. So the way you can pay us back, share it with someone, give us a 5-star review. Super easy. If you do that, you have made my day, and I know you've made Tom's day. So, and we have discussions like this every day. And as you can see, they're not heavily scripted. And sometimes Tom runs it, and sometimes I jump in and run it. And we have what I would call, a discussion over coffee, really. And if that appeals to you, please share it. I can't say that enough. I've probably said that enough.
Excellent job. Well done.
Can you tell Tom that over the last 2 nights, my cat has got me up before 3:00? And I'm not talking up like hang out with me for 5 minutes. I mean, like climbing all over me and feed me, feed me, feed me. So I have been working on 3 hours of sleep. And one of the things that I know about Bob, if you want any kind of expectations of my accomplishment, sleep is a really key factor.
Isn't there a movie like that? What about Bob?
That's the guy that goes to the resort and chases down his psychiatrist or psychologist and just won't leave him alone. And then the family realizes that he's actually more of a family guy than Richard Dreyfuss's character because he's human.
I don't know.
I do know. I've seen that movie a number of times. I've had a What About Bob t-shirt. That.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Bill Murray and Richard Dreyfuss.
Yeah, I don't think I've seen it. I just have heard the saying.
You've never seen it? Oh, you got to look it up. It's hysterical.
It's kind of like you and Harry Potter and like, I'll take a look at it.
All right. Well, folks, this has been great. Really enjoyed you being here. We come back tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. Eastern time. We're going to do this all over again. That's right. And we will talk about expectations yet another way tomorrow. Tomorrow is our Discoveries of the Week. So that's where Tom and I really get at what have we discovered over the week? Literally, the shift in each of us. And it's inspiring. It's funny. I was looking at the podcast numbers, Tom. We get more people who watch the Discoveries of the Week than any other broadcast each week.
Interesting.
So there must be something really good there. Or people have time over the weekend to catch one episode, and that's the one they choose.
Could be.
So, Tom, would you like to do your closing so then I can do my pithy closing?
Okay. Well, thanks, everyone, for joining us. We look forward to seeing you inside the Ring of Renegades Facebook group. If not, see you tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. Eastern time for our next edition of today's Antidote. Have a great day.
And, of course, embrace the renegading you. It's worth it. Do it. You can do it. I know you can. And thank you, Michael, for your comments. Michael says, have a good day. You too, Michael.
Right. See you soon. Thanks for listening to today's Antidote, powered by the Renegade Success Network. The Renegade Success Network helps you confidently create your own unique pathway to success. To learn more about the Renegade Success Network and how you can take your next step, follow us on Twitter, connect on LinkedIn, or join the Ring of Renegades Facebook group. For full details on how you can join our community, go to renegadesuccessnetwork.com. Embrace the renegade in you.